And first, I want to say good afternoon and thank you for joining us. I am Jill Taylor. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm the manager of school and teacher programs here at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Welcome to our program on Educator Best Practices for Arts Integration. We are excited that we have 6 teachers sharing ideas with you today, and we'll hear about discussion strategies and program ideas. And we'll start, we have elementary teachers, middle school teachers, and high school teachers today, and the program will start with elementary and then build up to high school teachers sharing ideas, but I think they're all ideas that any teacher can use. And just a little bit of housekeeping. So we are doing this in a meeting format because we hope we have a little time at the end for possibly breakout rooms or some sharing. So you will have video and speaking capabilities. We just ask that you mute yourself while other people are speaking. And please don't hesitate to use the chat for questions. And let's see. We are offering certificates of participation for today's webinar. It'll count as 0.1 CEU, and there'll be a Google form that you can fill out at the end of the program to get that credit. And now we do want to take some time for our museum land acknowledgement and recognize the history of the museum site and the presence of generations of people that have come before us. And this land acknowledgement was developed in collaboration with Dr. Mary Beth Fitz, Assistant State Archaeologist at the Office of State Archaeology, and Danny Bell, President of the Triangle Native American Society and a member of the NC Commission of Indian Affairs. So I'll give you a little time to read through that. And of course, this shows how much we don't know yet about our history, but it is an ongoing process. But I think most of you joining us today are familiar with the North Carolina Museum of Art. We are on a 164-acre campus in Raleigh, North Carolina. And today we have the teachers joining us are from Fayetteville, Garner, Raleigh, Winston-Salem, and Hickory, so from all across the state. We do want to mention some upcoming programs that we have. So we're in the middle of an art and math online course right now, and at the end of March, we will be offering our Art and SEL online course. That's a 15-hour course. And then April 19th, we will have a webinar for our Fault Lines exhibition, which is all contemporary art dealing with art and the environment. And we're collaborating with the EPA's office at Research Triangle Park. They have a team of educators there that work with teachers. So it'll be a combination of scientists talking about the issues that artists are responding to in the exhibition. Also have our Teacher Tuesdays. So that's an opportunity for teachers to come and see the exhibitions for free. And those will be April 26th and May 24th. And we will be putting links to the slides and these in the chat so you can get those later. Now, I think, Kristen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Smith. I work very closely with Jill Taylor and all of the teacher programs to provide online courses and work with teachers across the state to bring all kinds of relevant resources. So we're super excited to highlight some amazing teachers that we've worked with in the past in today's webinar. And what we're hoping you'll walk away with is some different strategies that can highlight ways of leading discussions in your classroom around works of art to get your students critically thinking about themselves and the world through art, and to make some art as well, different forms of creative expression that you'll see today. And hoping that we have time that we will be sharing as a collaborative community, but hoping to have a little bit of time at the end for you all to be able to ask questions and share with each other, and leave, as always, with some really great resources from the NCMA that you can use in your teaching. So we have worked with all of the teachers that are with us presenting today. They were part of different cohorts of the Fellowship for Collaborative Teaching that ran from 2016 to 2020. It was a year-long program that offered teams of teachers the opportunity to work with each other and museum educators to develop skills and strategies and resources for their classroom that focused on arts integration. We've had educators from across the state participate, and although we've been on a COVID pause with the program, we are hoping in some way we can get it back up again with some of the new changes that are happening ahead and funding on its way. So we will see. Stay tuned. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our first presenter, who is not able to virtually, physically be with us on this webinar, but we were able to record her. So we're going to hear from Shojana Evans and some ways that she uses different strategies that she has learned with works of art from the museum's collection. So I'll let Jill go ahead and start that video. It's a little movement through the computer.
We're very excited to have as our first presenter today, Shojana Evans, who's an elementary art teacher in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and she is at Alma Esom Elementary and Lillian Black Elementary, and she's going to share several ideas with you today about discussion strategies that you can use with your students. Hi, Shojana.
Hello everyone. I'm sharing these strategies not just so I'm sharing them with art teachers, but I want to share them with classroom teachers because I found them to be really good when I was in the program, seeing other classroom teachers using these strategies. Because they're not just strategies that are just good for art teachers, but they're really good in helping your students to critically think and talk about and discuss with each other. And when you're discussing classroom information and stories, these strategies are really good for that. But this is another way to do it to kind of spark your students' attention. So you finding another way to introduce what you already do in the classroom with them. What would a picture tell if it could talk? And pictures are good storytellers. So in this picture right here, I see. What is it that you see? And that is basically describe to me the details that are going on in this piece of artwork. So if you could put your ideas in the chat box for me and just tell me what you see, describe. All right. I think. Now that you've looked at the piece of artwork, describe things that you've seen, what do you think? What do you think is going on? What do you think is happening in the picture? What does it make you think of? And if you could put those ideas also in the chat box. And I wonder, this is where you start, after you've looked at the picture and you have started thinking about what the picture may mean to you or what you see, what kind of questions do you have about the artwork? What does it make, if you could meet the artist, what questions would you ask the artist about this piece of artwork? So put your questions in the chat box. I see, I think, I wonder. So I had you just now kind of introduced you to the idea of what I do in my classroom, but I took some of these different visual liturgy strategy activities and I've used them in my classroom with the students, young, my kindergartners all the way through to my fifth graders. Why not use artworks as a way to springboard a lesson? In the classroom, that lesson could be on weather, that lesson could be on family, it could be on cultures. This activity it falls very good in with what you teach in the classroom. Putting up a picture, we are visual people, so putting up a picture to catch a child's attention and getting them to discuss and talk about, just like you do a story, is a great way to have them practice on those skills that you're looking for. I did it by actually creating a museum outside on the walls around my classroom. And I put up big pieces of artwork, reproductions. And I had the students actually looking at the artwork, telling me what they saw, what they think was going on, and beginning to ask questions about the pieces of artwork. I see, I think, I wonder. I also came across a site that had some really good worksheets. So for classroom teachers who like to have them also write, sometimes I don't have a whole lot of time in the art room to get them to write. It's more about them speaking, and sometimes I do. So in this particular activity I actually did with the museum outside, I used the art class curator, and I kind of put the link up at the top here. I use this visual thinking strategy to focus on details and discussion in the classroom in another way by doing I Spy with my younger kids. So I used North Carolina Museum has a nice packet of small reproductions, which worked excellent on my tables. And I used those and laid them out on the table, and we kind of pretended we were in a museum. And they walked around, and first they had to look at the pieces of artwork that were in the museum. And then we played I Spy. And so I would give them clues. So this is where you could have students looking for details. I did things such as stormy weather, pictures that had stormy weather in it, children playing. Could they find a picture that had bright colors? Could they find a picture that had animals in it? And I use also some of the things that we're learning in the classroom. Could they spot a picture that has still life? But those pictures, you can also take concepts that are in your classroom and having them look for those ideas within the pieces of artwork that you have laid around the classroom as well. A lot of classroom teachers tell me that their students have a hard time when they want them to write, to giving them those details about what they write. So in this activity, they're grouped, and one person is the viewer of the artwork, whatever piece of artwork you put up. And they have to describe that artwork to their partner because the partner has to draw the picture. So they really have to think about where things are placed and be able to describe as many of the objects that they see in the picture. It's a fun way to get the kids thinking about details and how they put more details, and helping them also to think about the details when they're writing, putting those details. But also, just as a takeaway, these activities are great starters to your lesson. The classroom teacher does not have to know the history of the artwork, so don't think that you've got to be able to discuss the period and the time this piece of artwork was created. It's good to choose pieces of artwork that are narratives, that tell stories, just like when you're focused on stories in your classroom, because the students can really discuss, and they'll have lots of discussion about what they see. Students are creatively and critically thinking with these activities. They're communicating and they're collaborating through visual literacy. The North Carolina Museum, I put the site down here for their NC Learn section. It's a really good section where you can pull lots of artwork that they have, visual images, and choose something that works in your classroom.
Great. Thank you so much, Shojana. We're so glad that you could join us to share everything you've been trying in your classroom.
Excellent. So that's our first presenter, Shojana, and I'm sharing a handout that has all of the presenters' names and actually has a link to the art class curator handout that she was mentioning. in her presentation. So we are now going to hear from another elementary teacher, Denise Knowles, who will also talk about See, Think, Wonder, but then also some creative applications you can do after that discussion strategy. So welcome, Denise.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Again, my name's Denise Knowles, and I am at Viewmont Elementary as a art teacher. And for this particular strategy that I'm going to be talking about, I use 3rd grade, but I teach kindergarten through 5th grade. And I have about 500 students here at Viewmont. And then I also go to another elementary school in our district one day a week, and I have about 100 or 200 students that one day that I see. So combined, it's a lot of kids. I've got to learn all their names. But in any event, so you can go to the next slide, please. I also did the I See, I Think, I Wonder strategy with my 3rd graders. And I chose this piece of artwork first. I love the artist, Romare Bearden, and this is just a bright, colorful, cheery kind of picture. It's Black History Month. We just kind of took all kinds of things to use this picture with. But when I use the I See, I Think, I Wonder visual thinking strategy, I present it to the children without telling them any background about it. So just as you were listening to previously, you're just showing the picture, and then you're letting the kids share what they see, what they think, and then what they wonder. I also use Art Class Curator because it's free, and you don't have to make it if you can find it out there that somebody else has made it for you. So that's also a bonus. But I set it up in the classroom. The kids shared a table, but they weren't talking during any of this. I just really wanted it to be something that they were just looking on their own when they were writing about what they see. They're not worried about spelling. I told them I'm not, checking your spelling. Don't get hung up on how to spell a word, just sound it out. And they took about 5 minutes to write down as many things as they could see, what colors, what, just, anything, any little detail that they could see. So just kind of search every corner and just really get them to look around the whole picture and not just focusing on one thing. So I really wanted them to be silent and just to look at it, to see all of the list of, how many things they could list. And then for the middle section of this process is I think. And so again, it's just what you think is happening in the picture. And then finally, at the end is what they wonder. And I presented it to them as something they could, what do you have a question about what's happening in the piece of artwork? Or do you even have a question for the artist about how they made the artwork? Like, I wonder if this is painted, or I wonder if this is a photograph or something, where did you get your inspiration? So I told them, if the artist walked into our room right now, what would you want to ask that person? But again, while they're filling those 3 sections out, they don't have any background information other than just looking at the picture. All right, you can go to the next slide. So then and then before we get to this next part, after they fill out those 3 sections, then I take time to go over all of those with the kids and make sure that everybody gets heard, everybody gets to share what they see. There are no wrong answers. I want everybody to feel comfortable sharing things. And I'm sorry, could you just back it up one more time? Because this is just a really funny part. In that picture with Romare, with the picture that's on the left, the kids thought this was an avocado. The first time I did this, they were like, there's an avocado in this picture. I'm like, where in the world is the avocado? So I always get a kick out of that, because you never know what they're going to see, and there are no wrong answers. And that, if the kids don't know what a tuba is, look at this avocado shaped thing. And then that's where that is the tuba. And then they can kind of see it in a different way. So it's just always kind of funny, and you never know what they're going to see. All right. And then in this slide, this is the middle part of our lesson. I shared up to that point, they hadn't known the name of the artwork or the artist. So then I explained that this is Romare Bearden, and the piece of artwork is called Ragging Home. and I shared a short video about him, which I put the link up there on that slide. The middle picture is just another picture from that video. And then there's also another piece of artwork from the North Carolina Museum of Art website that I found on there, but also just sharing another piece and how even though his artwork can look very different, there are lots of similarities, and then introduce collage to them just to make sure that they know what a collage is, and that Romare Bearden was known for his artwork as being collage. So just using, you know, more than one thing, usually three-ish kind of different medium, and just that's what makes it a collage, and how it can be a more abstract picture, or it could be a picture that you can see the people or the places or the things in it. But he in particular used paint, he used photographs, he used painted paper as well to cut out his shapes, magazine pictures, whatever he had to kind of piece his artwork together. So I based my project on doing a collage. So I told them we were going to be using like 3 different kinds of materials for this piece of artwork. So on this slide, the first thing that we did was to use chalk pastels, and they got to like get dirty and smear the colors around, and we kind of layered things in. And, you know, that was just something kind of fun and different for them that we don't normally get to use a whole lot of. And then we also used oil pastels, and to add some more details to kind of go back over what they wanted to emphasize in the chalk. They could use the oil pastels on top of that. And then finally, for the third part, I had magazines, and I love our state magazines. They are wonderful for finding all different kinds of pictures. It's a 99% safe magazine. You don't have to worry about finding, you know, pictures that you wouldn't necessarily just want the kids coming up with, and just a lot of beautiful pictures in that. But then other catalogs, I had Lego catalogs and other kinds of catalogs that I've collected over the years. So I passed out a couple catalogs to each, or a couple magazines to each student, and they were to find some pictures that they wanted to include in their collage. And I told them it could be, you know, of their favorite things, or you could make a realistic picture, like something on a grassy meadow and things in the sky that you would normally see, or it could just be how, you know, the things that they liked and how they wanted it to be portrayed. So they absolutely loved doing this project, and it's one that I continue to do each year because they just really get to use all different parts and all different things. It's not just one type of art medium. It's, you know, using lots of different things, so they get exposed to all of those things. So just some of the, and this took me, I get to see the kids once a week for about 40 minutes. And this took me 4 classes to get through, because we did do a lot of talking at the beginning and speaking, and then a couple classes to do the art project. And so this is probably one of my favorite visual thinking strategies, just because it helps the students look at art in a different way and really take the time to look at it, instead of just, oh, here's all this, you know, artwork from this artist, but really taking one and really looking deep into it, because then they can just see things kind of in a different kind of a light. And when they're seeing artwork outside of this art room, that hopefully they're taking the time to really look at it and see and think and wonder, you know, what's going on at it. And that people have different opinions, because it was really hard for them at the beginning when I started doing this to not have an argument over, that's an avocado, no it's not, what is it, you know, all those things. So I really emphasize for them to, there are no wrong answers. Everybody sees something in this, and it may or may not be what you see. And then if you wanted to do another extension beyond what I did, you could even have them take their piece of artwork that they made and then write a poem off of that. Or they could do a self-evaluation about, what they really enjoyed out of the project, what they found interesting, what they struggled with, just, kind of like to make it go even further and really get in depth with this. So you can take it as, from as short, just talking about a piece of artwork, to really having it be a full project with a lot of different working parts in it. So I really have, so thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Really appreciate your sharing. Now we're going to move on to middle school, where we have Joe and Millie are going to talk about the collaborations they had over the course of time working together as an art teacher and a Spanish teacher. So take it away, Joe and Millie.
Okay, so Millie and I did colaboraciones or collaborations, and we worked together to create a different project for each grade level, 6th, 7th, and 8th. You can see the pictures there of Picasso, Frida Kahlo, and Diego Velázquez. Next slide, please. So the overview, Juntos Podemos, together we can do it. We can do it together. We participated in the fellowship program in 2017, and it was a great addition to our respective curriculum because we were able to use strategies we learned from the North Carolina Museum of Art, and we weaved arts integration into our respective disciplines. And our goal was to have different portrait projects for each level, and we focused on Picasso, Frida, and Diego Velázquez. Next slide, please. We did a similar structure that was used today, a strategy where we had back-to-back drawings, and one student would hold the work of art and explain it to the person sitting behind them, and both people would have a chance to do that. So they would have one piece of art they'd explain to their friend, and it taught them that they had to be really, really specific. I just want to add this in there. There was a picture of Frida who drew a deer head on herself, and she had 7 or 9 arrows. I forget how many it was exactly, all placed throughout her body as the deer body. And if a student just said, I see like a deer with some arrows in it, and then they would look at the real thing and see how many there were. And it taught them to be very specific about how many of each thing that they would see and where those things were located. So this is one of the things the kids really enjoyed this, and it was eye-opening to them about how specific you have to be about giving directions. Next slide, please. And Millie's going to tell us, yeah.
Yeah, and that was the back-to-back drawing that they'd mentioned earlier. We also did a lot of the I see, I think, I wonder strategies and some of the other visual learning strategies as we introduced different artworks to them. But the big thing we did at the end of the 2-week project for each grade level was to have a collaborative project where they represented their own art that they created and some of their reactions to some of the art. And this is our Frida Kahlo panels that the 7th graders did. And they learned interjections and descriptive words in Spanish to describe the artwork of Frida Kahlo. And they put together the panels in groups that also showed their artwork, her artwork, their reactions to her artwork as well. And then we had different kids come through from other classes to vote on their panel that they created to display the artwork. So the collaboration wasn't just us collaborating as teachers. We modeled it, and then they collaborated together to create a display of artwork. Next slide. And then for the 8th grade, we moved on to Velázquez, and we also used Kehinde Wiley artwork to represent our Hispanic and African-American students. And then these got actually in the museum, which was very interesting. When we go to our trip, we would take the kids and they saw work from their own school displayed in the museum. And that you can see here, they created their own modern day Velázquez inspired by the Kehinde Wiley. Next slide. These are closer versions. There's a pencil one. Here they use the collage technique. They were allowed to pick whichever type they wanted of artwork they wanted to do. If they wanted to use pencil, if they wanted to do collage. Next slide. Here we had a combination of colored pencil and watercolor. Next slide. And then this student really wanted to do, was inspired by Picasso. So since she had been with us all 3 years for all 3 collaborations, she did hers inspired by Picasso. Next slide. And then we did a collaboration with Peter Marin. He came in and actually taught the kids how to make artwork pieces for an ofrenda that they also put up at the museum with Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera's exhibit, the traveling exhibit. Here they're making the marigolds that were in the ofrenda. Next slide.
And on this slide, you can see that there is a picture of Frida Kahlo front and center. And if you look over over Peter Marin's shoulder in the middle photo, that was made by Peter himself. He made that painting, and he's very talented. Together, the students from our school and 3 other middle schools made about, I want to say 4,000 of those flowers to adorn the ofrenda. And our students, 80 of our students made skulls. They were smaller than the ones that you see in the foreground, but those skulls were on display at the museum. And when we took our field trip and the kids were able to say, oh, there's the one I made. Oh, that's the one I made. It was really, really cool for them to have that sense of ownership. And there's nothing like that. I think that it's just an amazing experience, and the friendship or the relationship we've forged with the museum has been so great for us, for our kids to be able to get there and actually see their own work on display. Next slide, please. The first takeaway that for us was it was such a rich experience for the students because their artwork was exhibited at the museum and they were able to see those pieces. They were counted every night as part of the museum's collection. And when we told them that the security guard told us that each piece gets counted every night, and those pieces were considered part of the museum's collection. Their design of the skulls made the flowers for the ofrenda. It was a really cool cultural bridge between our culture and theirs. And by inviting Peter Marin in, we were able to provide more in-depth cultural information than basic vocabulary and simple biographical information about the artist. We forged a relationship with Peter that will always be there. And one other things I wanted to say about that was that Peter told us he had more family memories of Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, with his family than they had of Christmas. And I thought that was amazing.
And our last takeaway was about the collaboration and working together to co-teach and to co-plan really brought out the best of Joe and I's strengths as educators. And we made the activities more engaging. The kids did not look at it as just an assignment or a project that they had to do for a grade. They became excited as they knew every year, each grade level, they had another Spanish art collaboration project they were going to do, where they do the back-to-back drawing and the I think, I wonder, and the different activities like that, and then do their own artwork in a big project to display it together. And then they put their collaborative heads together as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe and Millie. It's just fantastic to see your partnership over time. All right, we're going to move to high school now, out to the Winston-Salem area. And Molly Muse is going to share a project that she does with her 11th grade English class. Welcome, Molly.
Hi, thank you, Kristen. So yeah, I teach English 3 at Reynolds in Winston-Salem, and this presentation is going to walk through a self-portrait poem project that I do. So before we get started and dig into the project, I want to take a moment to think about how we would describe ourselves. So just type your answers into chat. Don't deliberate too long. Just put the first words that come to mind. But what words describe how you want others to see you? What words describe how you actually are? Okay, good. Thank you. All right, so if we can move on and get into the overview. So the self-portrait poem project is an arts-enhanced assessment that assesses a student's ability to apply imagery, figurative language, diction, and other poetic devices. The students write a self-portrait poem and create a visual self-portrait and poet statement to go with it. So in my English class, I'm pretty flexible about the visual self-portrait. Bare minimum is a basic photo collage, but I'll accept any visual representation. It can be a digital collage, it can be traditional drawing or illustration, just any artistic product. And a lot of students get really into this and go all out. So some of the benefits of doing this project are that it's social emotional learning, it's highly engaging, it's developmentally appropriate because it allows teenagers to explore their identity. It uses higher order thinking skills, it's standards based, and it is adaptable and expandable. So during the unit preceding this project, students analyzed the effect of diction, which is word choice, on tone, and evaluated the impact of figurative language, and as well as identified the author's perspective. We watched the film Dead Poets Society. We worked with 19th and 20th century American poets. We explored transcendentalist concepts, and we used visual literacy strategies to facilitate discussions around self-portraits by Beverly McIver. So you've already seen what some of these visual literacy strategy discussions might look like. And if you've done the online visual literacy course, then you're familiar with them. For this painting, after going through the questions with my students, I show them the title, which is, it's called, the title is Truly Grateful, and give them some background about the artist, then ask them if knowing that information changes their interpretation on the painting. I don't usually share the title of artwork or artist background because I want students to be confident in creating their own meaning and you know, their own interpretation when they interact with a piece of art. But on this portrait, I do like to challenge the students to think about how positive emotions might look different than we expect. So I use these two self-portraits by Beverly McIver from North Carolina Museum of Art. My students appreciate that she is originally from Greensboro and got her bachelor's degree from Central University. Also, there is a video I usually show of her discussing her work and concepts related to identity. But you could use the other self-portraits from the museum's collection if you think they would resonate better with your students. So these were a couple that I found, but there's certainly a lot more portraits that you could use. So the self-portrait poem criteria. I require that the poem be at least 14 lines long and use poetry format. The students have to include figurative language. They need to include imagery and use tone intentionally. And it has to be accompanied by a self-portrait collage or other visual self-portrait. So they can use an app, or they can draw, paint, use magazine cutouts, any other artistic method that they want to use. It just has to be more than a single selfie. And then finally, the project has to be accompanied by a poet statement that explains the choices they made when writing the poem. So before students start on the poem, I have them respond to some thought starter questions that you can see on this slide, just to kind of get them focused on what a portrait reveals about a subject and why we create self-portraits. And now I have some examples. So the first example, I love how the imagery in this poem shows how the student feels alive, or fully alive, when he's driving. He's got a part in here: a steering wheel in my hands, the leather running past my fingers, a shift knob clicking perfectly into place. There's actually even some sound. I love the sound of the last two lines, a shift knob clicking perfectly into place. It kind of mimics the way that might feel. This next one is called rompecabezas, which means puzzles, or literally head breakers. I kind of love that. The student used an extended metaphor comparing the important parts of his life to puzzle pieces that make him whole. And he used imagery towards the end of the poem to show the things that he cares about the most. His visual piece was a simple collage style, and this is what I see for probably most of the submissions, but not all of them. Okay, this next one, this student had a hard time getting started, but her end product was so beautiful. I was so proud of where she ended up. My next example, sorry about the lens flare. My next example is a little different. It's from the shyest student I've ever had. And I knew she was a musician, so I told her she could put her poem to music instead of creating a visual artwork. So she ended up doing, she felt more comfortable doing that. And her recording is the loudest I've heard her voice all year. So the poem seems very simple on the surface, but it captures her personality perfectly.
Purple is a color I love. I don't have a favorite shade. Milk that is as white as a dove is something I don't want made. Cheesecake is my life. I eat it after I cut it with a knife.
I think it's adorable. Okay, so those were some examples, and I just have a couple slides about best practices and takeaways. So you wanted to teach discussion early and practice those activities regularly. It's like exercise. If you don't use it, you lose it. Have all the students write out their answers before you call on them. Use wait time to give them time to really think about their answer while they're writing it, and circulate to make sure everyone's participating. When you call on students to share, you can use a no opt-out policy to make sure they fully answer. Repeat students' answers. So when they do answer, repeat the answers back to them to summarize, clarify, and ensure everyone hears it. And if you're using the strategy where you have them write down the answers, a lot of times students that are too shy to read theirs out loud, they're fine to let you read it. Especially if you look at it and you're like, oh, this is really good. Can I read this? They'll let you read it. And if you have a really shy class, you could give them Post-it notes. Like maybe they would prefer a little more anonymity with it. Give them Post-it notes, and they can just go and post the Post-it notes up on a wall. If you're teaching virtually, you can use digital tools that display student responses anonymously. Also, this project is SEL goldmine. High schoolers are so introspective and self-expressive anyway that they eat this up. It's a good project to do later in the year. They might not want to open up on day one, but also it has a lot of intrinsic motivation since it aligns to their emotional and developmental needs. It's a good idea to chunk your activities. I like to switch between students absorbing and students doing. You can easily do it as a digital, in a digital classroom or traditional classroom. And I recommend crowdsourcing your students for suggestions of what apps to use for digital collages, because they know all the good apps. And you could easily, I did it in an English classroom, and so I had it based on ELA standards, but you could shift the focus to the artistic process and visual art standards. And then it's a way to integrate literacy strategies into your visual arts class. Finally, I recommend grading in accordance with the personal nature of the project and the time constraints that the students had. So I grade pretty generously because I haven't done the project with revision rounds. I've done it in like a week, maybe a week and a half. But it would be conducive to do it, stretch it out longer, do a writer's workshop, have them, edit and revise. But also I've had students show some real vulnerability and openness with this project. And so that's another reason I grade pretty generously. And then, it's my last major grade of the term. So it ends up being a good grade boost for them at the end of the quarter. So that is it. I have some resources on the next slide, but I think those will be in the handout for you guys.
Yep, and they have those in, they'll have the slide set as well. Thank you so much, Molly. Lots of passion in that work, I can tell from the kids, and I can see your love for them. So we're going to move on to our final presenter, also high school, Marla Dobbs Hopkins. Hawkins, so excited for you to share your projects with the group. So welcome, Marla.
Hey everyone, thank you. I'm excited to be sharing this with you. So if you could just move to the next slide, I'm going to have you do a little warm up in the chat, and not to be confused by these three different words because they are separate phases. So if at first you would just drop in the chat anything that comes to mind for you when you hear the word cats. Okay, so we have a variety of responses. Looks like people feel differently about cats, or different thoughts come to mind. let's drop in the chat how you feel about guacamole, or words that describe how you feel about it. Looks like guacamole has become a thing. I know I've like been around people who will not try it, but yeah, okay. So we see some words in there, slimy, that are like, a lot of people like guacamole. I love it though. And then finally, if you could drop in the chat, what feelings, what words come to mind to describe your feelings about geometry or geometry class. So yeah, a variety of responses. And so the intention with that is just for you to kind of an introduction to this activity, to understand that we all experience the same situations differently. And so if you can move on to the next slide. This lesson is about understanding other people's experiences and perspectives through art. It is a great way to build social emotional learning skills, and also to help students with understanding others' perspectives and empathy. So this would also work well, I believe, for language arts, literature classes, and for social studies classes. So if you can move to the next slide. We do a variety of different types of activities to build them up to the art. So, and to kind of touch on all their different senses. I started off with this little brief story about the Allegory of the Cave by Plato, which basically talks about how these people, had been raised and born and raised in this cave and knew nothing about the outside world except the shadows that they saw. And then finally, one person left the cave and came back and told them what the real world was really like. And they were violent towards him. They were really upset. And so we talked as a class about why do you think that might be, and the way that sometimes people have a hard time understanding or hearing things that are different than their perception. So you can move to the next slide. And what actually this right here triggered the idea for this whole lesson for me, and it was from a trip that we took as a class. I should say I did this project with my AP 2D art class. So this is a group of seniors, but I think it would work well for really any high school students and maybe others. But it was a trip to the art museum. They had all seen Christina's World before. So Christina's World is not at the art museum, but so many art students are familiar with it. And I use it so much because it lends itself so well to narrative. Students really enjoy telling stories and imagining what's going on in this picture with the young woman laying on the ground far away looking at the house. But when we went to the art museum, to the North Carolina Art Museum, and a student had told me after we left about this picture on the right, which is also by Andrew Wyeth, called Weatherside. And as I looked into it more, it talks about how he, almost did this long investigation of several paintings of Christina Olsen's house. This is a real person who he painted. And this was one of them. And the person who wrote this kind of essay, his hypothesis was the reason it was painted from this view was Andrew Wyeth wanted to get on the ground to understand her perspective. And just briefly, if you're not familiar with the story, she was paralyzed. She was a real person, his neighbor, and she was paralyzed, and she would kind of drag herself around because she wanted to just not be confined to a wheelchair. And so we talked about how, the idea of seeing things from others' perspective. I thought this painting was a great example of that. So if you could move on to the next slide. Next, we did some video clips. So if you haven't ever watched this went viral several years ago, The Danger of a Single Story. And I hear it referred to so much in other talks and things that are going on. So this is a writer, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and it's long, so I played certain clips from it. But her point in this whole TED talk that she gives is the idea, and she gives examples from her life about how you will hear things about people and meet people and have an idea about them, but it's not the whole story. So they are full people. So she talks about, meeting someone who maybe comes from a very poor rural area where she's from, or people meeting her from where she comes from in Africa once she came to the US and making assumptions. And she basically winds up by saying, the problem with stereotypes is not that they're not true, but that they are, the students fill it in from what, to show that they were listening, but she says that they are incomplete. And so we talk about that, having like the whole story to understand people. And so you could move on to the next slide. So this was another way that we kind of now looked more at art. And this link at the bottom is actually a great tool. I put that in for students to use, but this is a painting called The Dentist from 1629 at the museum. And we just do a lot of discussion about if this painting were painted by the different people, like if the different people here were telling this story, how might the painting look different? So we start thinking about how artwork will look different depending on the person's perspective. So we talk about, if the dentist had painted it, what was he focusing on? What was important to him? He probably wouldn't even be thinking about this woman behind him. And, if she was painting it, who is she? Who do we think she is? So this was great discussion. And like I said, this tool, this link at the bottom is great because it helps you just hover over different parts. And then this is just an alternative. If you want to use different paintings, you can find your own paintings that lend themselves to narrative and showing different people that might have a different perspective. This one by John Biggers, we talk about how the children, it's about a fire and who set fire to this house or this church, but we talk about how the children look almost like they are kind of having fun in the rain, but of course the adults are feeling their mood is kind of different about why this happened. So it's just an alternative vision. So to get to the actual project that we did after going through all this different discussion and exercises, they had a great idea and understanding of what we were expecting. I wanted them to understand for their own how they would make artwork and bring it together. So it was really kind of collaborative about different experiences, experiencing the same situation differently. And so these are students that had been together for a while in the art room. So if you do this, I would recommend doing this a little bit later in the year or at least midway into it. But their first part of the project was for them to take photos of the classroom. They just walked around and I told them photos of anything they want, focus in on things that are important to them. So it could have been photos of themselves. It could have been photos of their artwork or their art supplies, photos of each other, photos of the, things around the room. And then I had them draft some sketches and notes about, something that choosing one of those photos or creating a drawing inspired by it to basically reflect what's their experience in that classroom for that year, what was most important to them. If they were talking about it years from now, what would have stood out to them? What would their memory have been? And so, some of those prompting questions were, what story would you choose to tell about the space and your experience? How would your artwork communicate that? And they had to write a written reflection. And so then we can go on to the next slide. And then these are some of the student examples, and probably the greatest part of this to help build that idea of understanding others came in the sharing of the artwork. So as you can see, all of the artwork is so different. And these are just little excerpts from some of their reflections. The student on the right that looks like collage really just talked about how every person is searching for creativity in their own manner. So the hands reflect that searching idea. It was kind of a metaphor for it. And the hands look different because they represent different people in the class. And he even included some Latin words he found that kind of represented this unclear ideas of what people are creating and how people think differently. So we can go to the next slide. And The one in the middle, I'll say really briefly, was interesting because this was a student who's always so engaged, and she was very disappointed because she was homesick during that time. So I told her, if that's what she's focused, what she's thinking about at the time, to draw. So she actually drew the screen, the Google Meet screen, while everyone else was in the classroom. So it actually came out pretty interesting. But I'll focus a little more on the artwork on the left, because I just thought it was really interesting how she had seen the little, model, the figures that you can move around for doing figure drawing out of wood. And she decided to photograph that and use those to represent her feelings that, that other students in the classroom everything comes easy to them. Those are the yellow and the blue, so they look bright, but she is the one in the middle who feels like frustrated sometimes and has this artist block, and her impression is everyone else is just, it's a breeze for them. So I thought that was an interesting interpretation. And then the last slide, I think I will focus on, these are all interesting. The student on this picture on the left, that's these watercolors and just his perspective of the room, looking at the whole room. He talks about how art class gave him a sense of peace. And so we talked about how you use certain materials and medium to tie into your message. And so he chose that kind of muted watercolors to create that feeling of peace. And yeah, these were, I think I spoke already a little bit about it, but that discussion is just great for building understanding and community. And it's a great essential part of it. I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Marla. I love the way that you shaped and designed that lesson with so many different resources supporting the idea of exploring perspective. So thank you for sharing. That concludes all of our educator presentations. We'll skip breakout rooms for this session. You have contact information for each of the presenters. So if you're looking for more information, you can contact them directly. I'm going to let Jill talk about the Google Form exit ticket, although I don't think it's that complicated. I'm going to pass it off to her.
Yes. Well, I'm just going to put the link directly in the chat there. But I think, and Kristen, if you can put the link again to the handout, the exit ticket will give you, should automatically generate a certificate when you complete it, and it'll have, some of those reflection questions, and the handout will give you kind of a quick synopsis of what the different presentations presented were, as well as a link to the slides and contact information for our presenters today. So we thank you so much for joining. I think it was really just interesting to hear all the different approaches. I think the last thing we wanted to mention is also we have our contact information here as well. And also wanted just to remind you of the teacher e-newsletter. So we'll kind of keep you up to date on all of our upcoming programs as well. So thank you so much for joining today.